Our second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. CPoe, and the topic is Christian living and self-esteem. And of course, Dr. Poe, before we had our first commercial break, you were simply listing a whole list of things that probably creates low self-esteem among people. Let's continue that.
Right. Well, let me just say, in terms of back to the manifestations, race prejudice, for example, is a major sign of low self-esteem. Of course, hate crimes. People often refer to the divide in the country now, and I think some of that, a significant amount of that divide, I think is a manifestation of low self-esteem. Now, let me just say that having low self-esteem or very low self-esteem is not a death sentence. It does not have to be permanent. Persons can overcome. As a matter of fact, for many years I had low. I would say my self-esteem was between very low and low. I was brought up in a Christian home, but I rebelled against that Christian upbringing beginning at about age 14. And it was only after a chronic mental illness, chronic physical illness, loneliness, social isolation, that I come back to the Lord and rededicate myself to Him. And for the last 35 years now, I've been trying to live a committed Christian life. And as a result, God has moved me from low self-esteem to a healthy self-esteem. So the fact of the matter is that God is the answer to low and very low self-esteem, but a person who has a problem, in order to experience his healing, he does require that we turn to Him, and he does require that we practice trying to live a life pleasing to Him. In other words, living a self-pleasing life rather than a God-pleasing life is the major source of self-esteem. Now, it is also true that growing up in an abusive family situation, in a neglectful family situation, growing up in a home where maybe one or both parents are on drugs, that's an example of self-pleasing behavior which impacts the self-esteem of the child and of the growing teenager, okay? So in some cases, a person's low self-esteem may have begun with what they experienced early on in their relationships in the home. At the same time, it's also true that I can choose to cause myself low self-esteem by my own self-centered or self-pleasing choices. And so I went from a self-pleasing lifestyle to a God-pleasing lifestyle. And so God did overcome my self-esteem for me.
You know, Dr. Poe, we talk about, we say God and Christianity and Jesus and etc. We're simply talking about the spiritual life.
Yes.
Now, what I've observed is that there are so many people that I know. You see, I've coming in contact with, really do not put much confidence in this spirituality that we talk about. I mean, have you observed that? I mean, people don't really rely upon what God says as a rule. Would that be your experience?
Oh, absolutely. And of course, it is also true that people who have low self-esteem most often are determined to have their own way. They're determined to live by their own rules. They're determined to do their own thing, which is another way of saying that they are self-centered, okay, rather than being God-centered. If I'm God-centered, my desire is to please Him. My effort is to live according to His commandments, according to His teachings. So I then become one of His followers. Whereas a person who rejects God, he wants to be His leader, okay? He wants to follow himself. He wants to be His guide. He wants to be His God.
He's God, that's what He's God unto Himself.
Right. And so the byproduct of that is what I call unresolved grief. In other words, whenever we go against the one who created us, whenever we rebel against His purpose for our lives, which is to live a life that's pleasing to Him, the result is it causes a certain amount of grief in our spirit. And that grief then becomes a core of low or very low self-esteem. And that hurts. Unresolved grief involves emotional pain. So the person then finds themselves driven to try to find a way to overcome the pain, to numb the pain. Alcohol is often the thing that a person turns to. Sex often is a thing that the person turns to. Food is often the thing that the person turns to in an effort to find relief from this pain that's the result of them choosing to do their own thing or to go their own way.
And I guess the solution for that is for them to recognize that that is one of the problems, that if they were to change to a God-centered environment or an attitude rather than a self-centered attitude, that they might be able to better deal with the pain that they believe that they are feeling.
Absolutely. You know, I'm a psychiatrist, as I said, and I've had occasion to practice psychiatry in many different settings, state hospitals, jails. I've also interviewed and done some counseling in prisons. I've worked with the homeless here in Nashville over a period of about 25 years. And yes, persons who are self-centered in their thinking, in their beliefs, in their attitude are hurting. The hurt may be experienced as loneliness. It may be experienced as just persistent anger. It may be experienced as despair or a sense of hopelessness and helplessness. Okay, but the pain is very real, or it may be experienced as emptiness. And God is the only healing. He's the only one can overcome that kind of pain. And so oftentimes people resist turning to Him because they really don't want to come under His authority. They want to do their own thing, but they have found that it doesn't work, and so they tend to resist. But for the person who is struggling with low or very low self-esteem, if he's willing to turn to God, if he's willing to draw closer to God, I'm convinced, based on my own experience, professional and personal, that the Spirit of God in that person will move that person from low or very low self-esteem to a healthy and a positive self-esteem.
And Dr. Poe, it seems that the real solution there is a spiritual life.
Absolutely.
I mean, and of course I think all of us, well, we both recognize that we're living in a spiritual universe, and that the Spirit is very, very important. But there are so many people who don't believe. You know, I think they give lip service, it appears to me, to this idea of a spiritual life. And in many instances, not even lip service, because they never demonstrate that by church going and et cetera, some of the things that should be a manifestation of a spiritual life, and yet we don't see them do that. Do you find that to be a problem as a psychiatrist?
Well, yes. I mean, of course, now there's a overt spirituality.
Okay, hold it a minute, Dr. Poe. That's that we want. And of course, we'll be back with our audience following this short commercial break. Yeah.